So welcome to the webinar. This is Anne Rolfe, founder of Mentoring Works, and welcome to this webinar, Mentoring in the Current Crisis. Now, this is an unscheduled webinar. I didn't intend to run this webinar when I set my plan for the year, but I actually started the year with a research trip which took me to the UK and was meant to take me to Spain as well. But about halfway through, things got out of hand. My family and my government here in Australia said that it was time for everyone who could to get home. It was a bit of a struggle to get home and cost me a lot of money, but I shouldn't complain about that because I got home safely, comfortably, and well. I went into the mandatory 14 days self-isolation, luckily enough, in my own home. But as I was lying in bed one day thinking about my business in this post-pandemic, or well, not post now, but during and after the pandemic, it suddenly hit me, would mentoring even be relevant now? And I started to feel rather despondent until I gave myself a bit of a mentoring talking to and said, hang on, let's turn that around. And when you think about it, mentoring has never been more relevant. We are in the middle of a crisis. And I'm sure you have a lot of other priorities. Maybe you've got maybe you're in business and you're trying to keep it going on a skeleton staff, or maybe you're in the university. They're trying to figure out how you're going to help your students learn and keep yourself and them safe at the same time. Maybe you're juggling that work from home, as 80% of you on the line today are, but maybe you're juggling that with homeschooling the kids or helping them learn remotely. Or you might be struggling in the imposed self-isolation. Worse, you could, like my son-in-law, be looking after elderly and sick parents as well as his own family. So despite all of this, however, I maintain that mentoring has never been more important. Why? Because mentoring really is leadership. And everyone's crying out for that right now. The behaviours and skills we use as mentors are definitely needed now. And mentoring is a sane, meaningful and caring conversation. And that's absolutely essential right now. And I believe you'll be having these conversations, whether you're speaking to family, friends, people at work, or complete strangers. You can draw on your mentoring skills that you have already, you're learning, you're developing. The skills of listening and empathy, of facilitating informed choices. We've still got decisions to make every day. Every one of us has got to make decisions about what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And as a mentor, you can help ensure that people make informed choices for themselves. And of course, you can be a role model in the things that you say, the things that you do, and the way that you conduct yourself. And I think that's never been more important. There's a bonus. When you help others, you actually help yourself. You help others cope and you help yourself as well. So, today, we're going to be talking about, in this webinar, we're going to be talking about how to reduce kind of the instinctive reactions, the stress reactions, the kind of panic reactions that I think all of us are feeling from time to time right now. We're also going to talk about these meaningful conversations, really deep conversations, helpful conversations, the conversations that allow people to open up and express themselves. And Remedius, I think it was you who asked me before we even started, how do you get started with a conversation with someone who maybe is a little bit reticent, isn't a little bit unwilling or unable to share. So I'll be sharing some techniques and some sample questions, and I'll be looking for you to share yours. I know there's very experienced mentors out there. Now, we'll touch on this in the first section on building resilience, but we'll come back to it at the end, and I'll be asking you, as well as offering some ideas of practical strategies to increase your well-being and your ability to cope. And just have a look at the picture that I've used to illustrate this, because it's one we're used to seeing on the aeroplane when we were able to get on aeroplanes. In the safety demonstration, they always tell you to fit your own mask first before you try to help other people. You can't help other people if you've got no oxygen yourself. And those vital seconds you use to put on that mask mean that you are equipped and able then to help the person next to you and others as well. So that's what I want to stress throughout this webinar. We need to look to ourselves. This is not being selfish. This is being really sensible to look after ourselves. Now, just before I go any further, I want to stress that I am not a psychiatrist. I'm not even a psychologist or a grief counsellor. I'm a career counsellor and a person who deals in mentoring and mentoring programs. Mentors are not expected to be grief counsellors, psychiatrists or psychologists. So I want to urge you, if you find that any of this material raises concerns for you, so I'm going to be talking about armed hold-up, I'm going to be talking about death and dying and grief, and if any of these issues raise any concerns to you, it's really important that you contact a professional. Here in Australia, you can ring Lifeline on 131114 or Beyond Blue on 1300224636, or you can check their websites. They've actually got online chat groups going now. You may have professionals within your organisation. You may have an employee assistance scheme. You may have counsellors and professionals in this field in your organisation and in your country. I'm sorry I can't give you them all because we're going global here with this webinar, but do please reach out if you need more than a mentor to help you, and mentors are not expected to be these professionals. So let's go on with our first topic, which is really all about reducing the instinctive reactions that our brain triggers and building our resilience and the resilience of others. So we can't deny that we're in a worldwide crisis as a result of the COVID-19. I'm not going to dwell on the evidence of that, and the impacts will be different for each of us depending on where we are in the world and our personal circumstances. We are all going to have emotional reactions. It's human, it's normal, and understanding these reactions so that we can respond effectively is critical. So here's a quick little rundown, a very simplified one of what's going on in our brains at the moment. So we all have these emotional reactions, and they're very fast. They're triggered in the limbic area of the brain at the base of the skull. Rational thinking takes a lot longer, and it happens in the neocortex just behind your forehead. It's the instantaneous emotional reaction of the brain that triggers the fight, flight, freeze reaction, which I'm sure you're familiar with. We evolved from ancient ancestors whose survival depended on their ability to react fast to any threat by defending themselves, that's the fight, running away, that's the flight, or hiding, that's the freeze, where you hide in place, or perhaps you hide a bush or something like that. But we still do that now, and it's becoming more recognised that people often freeze. I'm sure you've had that instinctive reaction yourself at times. But when our executive function kicks in, then we've got a chance. What we like to do is, instead of the stimulus immediately leading to an instinctive response, what we'd like to happen is to create a bit of a break by kicking in that executive function, that rational thinking, create a break between the stimulus and the response. And that makes us more resilient and less reactive. Let's talk about some of the typical reactions to a crisis, and then I'll give you some practical strategies for thinking, actions, and behaviours that'll help. So some of you may be familiar with the Kubler-Ross 5 stages of grief. And I first came into contact with this when I worked in banking, and we used it to train managers about the impact of armed hold-up on staff. The research showed that the sooner the victims received support, the better likelihood there was of recovery from the trauma. I've also used it with helping people deal with being made redundant. Again, the sooner people receive assistance, the more likely it is they will transition into a new stage of their career. I'd love to know if any of you have had contact with this before. You can type in the question comments field, and if you've used it in some of these or indeed in different ways. Kubler-Ross was a Swiss psychiatrist, and she studied the process of death and dying, and she identified these 5 stages of grief. It may be that you can relate to these from your own experience when losing a loved one, although not everyone experiences all or indeed any of them in this order. It is very common for people to feel, firstly, an initial reaction of denial. So this is that stimulus response. The initial reaction is denial. In fact, we've seen some countries doing this, and the leadership in some countries doing this at the beginning of the pandemic. So denial is a normal, natural reaction. Disbelief, numbing. It's a state of shock. You can't take it in. It seems unreal. There must be a mistake. I know a lot of people said to me right at the beginning, hey, it feels like we're watching a sci-fi movie here, a dystopian movie. It can't be true. But it's only after we kind of move out of this total denial and shock, and sometimes we can start to process a situation. Denial is like a foot on the brake. It dampens emotions and the emotions that threaten to overwhelm us, like anger. So we might be angry, and it's natural for some people to show anger. It may even be a necessary response. It may be the fear within us that's being expressed. But most of us have been taught not to express anger, and people are sometimes very uncomfortable in expressing any emotions or even feeling them. Things still, as we're reacting to the crisis, we're still reacting, seem unreal, and in a state of frustration and fear, we seek answers, maybe asking questions like, why me? I don't deserve this. I did nothing wrong. It's easy to look for someone or something to blame. If not ourselves, then who? Trying to suppress strong emotions only increases suffering and delays recovery. Anger, frustration, fear can energize you and can help you avoid staying stuck if you allow yourself to feel your feelings. And sometimes labeling them helps. If I can label it, so I'm feeling very frustrated. I'm feeling quite fearful. I'm feeling anxious. I'm accepting it and recognizing it for what it is. And that's what we need to do if we're going to move on. Unfortunately, in Kubler-Ross's study of death and dying, what a lot of people naturally go into is this idea of bargaining. So when the worst happens, it's not unusual, even for non-believers, to try and make a deal with God, their God. Feelings of desperation prompt this bargaining. You promise, I'll do better, I'll be better. If only things can go back to the way they were. You wish you could turn back time. You may feel guilty, even if you're not responsible for the event. You may find yourself thinking, if only, what if? You're looking for relief and hope and trying to avoid the grief. And we are all grieving, make no mistake of that. Unfortunately, the overwhelm of the situation and emotions triggered can drive us down into depression. You may feel drained, empty, wanting to hide away from the world. And I'll confess there have been mornings where I found it hard to get out of bed in the last 3 or 4 weeks. And that can be a symptom of depression. I'm not clinically depressed, fortunately. I know the signs, but I'm certainly down from time to time, and I'll bet many of you are too. So you may withdraw. The problem with this is you may draw away from the world. You might not want to talk. You might feel hopeless. Some people feel like things will never get better, so there's no point carrying on. And I warn you, some people do have suicidal thoughts. And this is why we need to make sure we know what resources are out there for us, for ourselves and for others, so that if you suspect that anyone is too deep in that depression for a simple assistance from a mentor, then you have a duty of care to help them get the assistance they need from a professional. However, if we are able to move through and say things, start to accept, hey, I am feeling very down. Hey, I did find it hard to get out of bed the other day. I am anxious, and I've kind of got this low-grade stress going on in the background all the time, despite what I do. Once you accept that, maybe label it, then you can start to move through this process. So I want to pause for a moment before I go on to the next slide and just check through the comments here and see what people are saying. Okay, we've got some of the introductions there. Okay, okay. Okay, just checking the comments. Okay, Doris is saying, have used Kubler-Ross regarding graduating from university and how it will impact students, especially when it comes to bargaining. Okay, and Maribel says she's used this model as well. Okay, I'll see if I can come back to some of those other comments. Okay, so let's keep moving here. I'm aware we've got a short amount of time. So the model kind of evolved over time, and it has been picked up by a lot of people for use in organisations, and this is kind of how that looked. This model's got the added dimension of morale. So morale is more or less the your feelings Yes, so your emotional condition, cheerfulness, confidence, enthusiasm, especially in the face of adversity. And also on this model, we've looked at time. So remember that not everyone goes through all these steps in order. And indeed, in grief, we often go back and forth. So we might fall back into that bargaining phase or back into the denial or even back into the anger, and we move back and forth. It's not kind of a one-way traffic here. So the key to this is without support, some people may get stuck, and this is what we're trying to help them get unstuck as mentors. So it might even be helpful to think about this a little bit more simply as having three main parts. So we've got the impact of the event. So that was a bit slow, the pandemic sort of started slowly. I think there's a lot of us who thought, oh, it's somewhere else. It won't get here, or it's not something I have to worry about. But then suddenly, or not so suddenly, it hit us. And so then there was kind of a recoil, oh my goodness, and we started to struggle. And then I think we're probably still a bit in the struggle, but we're also moving into reorganisation. We've done some reorganisation with more of us working from home, more of us mastering more technology, so we interact more. So those three phases, you don't have to remember all of these. Come back and refer to this. It will probably help you in your mentoring. Take a screenshot or go and watch the recording again, or look this up online. You'll find it, the Kubler-Ross change model. Find it for yourself. You'll find more detail about it and refer back to it, because what we're trying to do is operate kind of around here, maybe skip that altogether and move into experimentation, so trying out some things, making some decisions and integrating back into our life and livelihood. So I want to get into some practical strategies. I gave that to you for understanding what's actually going on and to give us a bit of a framework so we can use that. I want to get into some of the more practical stuff now and share with you the things we need to do, because we do need to work to build our resilience like a muscle. The more you work it, the stronger you become up to a point. So I want to talk about the thinking, the actions, and the behaviour that's really going to help us and make us stronger, because that fight, flight, freeze is very much an instinctive stimulus that gets an automatic response. And what we're trying to do by building resilience and practicing it regularly, we put a gap or a buffer in between that. I wanted to talk just a little bit about the control principle again, and some of you will be really familiar with this. I use it a lot in career development, and particularly, as I mentioned, people who've been retrenched, made redundant in the transition process. So Stephen Covey, in his classic 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, talked about the circle of concern, the things that we worry about, that we think about, that we dwell on, the stuff we see on the news every day in our circle of concern. And he also talked about within that, there is a much smaller circle of influence, or circle of control. So he's making the distinction there between the things we have some level of control or influence over, and that is much smaller than the things that we are concerned with. And making that distinction can actually reduce your stress, because if that circle of gets concern, if we focus on that, if we're watching too much news, listening to too much about the pandemic, and I'm not saying don't listen, I believe we need the facts and the information, but if we get too much, we can get overwhelmed by it. But if we focus on the things that are within our control, the things we say, the things we do, the things we think, and therefore the way we feel to an extent, those things expand our circle of influence and make us more resilient. So let's get into some of these practical things for resilience thinking, resilience actions, and resilience behaviours. So let's start with thinking. We have much more control over our thinking than we might imagine. So the first thing I'm going to suggest to you is to be in the present, and when you're sort of starting to think about all the things going on, try and look for the good. Now, I'm not talking about being Pollyanna. I know some people are looking for silver linings, but you can, take a little bit about what's good here and the small things. I know with my family, we've had several video conferences. We've been using Facebook video, and 2 of my grandsons have had birthdays, and so we've had 2 birthday parties online for those little boy and bigger boy. And that's so good. We're going to continue doing that as a regular thing. Instead of the phone calls and the one-on-one video chats, we're going to do it as a family because it's so fun and easy to do. It's also helpful to look at the past. Think about the past. Think about everything you've been through in your life. Now, don't get stuck dwelling it in a depressed way, but rather think about what's good in the past in terms of those tough things you've gone through and the things that helped you cope in the past. What did you do to help you get through that? Because you did get through it. You're here, living and breathing. You got through it. Make sure your focus is on, as I said, that circle of control. What can you actually control? What can you do or do differently for yourself? And I'm hoping you'll take a list away with you as a result of thinking this through today. Shift your thinking to problem solving. So instead of just what's wrong, think about, yes, how things are, but how do you want them to be in a practical way in terms of how they can be, and what can you do to achieve that? Now, that might be too big, so don't get overwhelmed. Break it down into smaller bits, the chunks. What can I do today? What can I do this hour? What can I do this minute? And look, we'll all have setbacks when we set goals, when we set out to do things. Not everything's going to go right, but if we do think about these as setbacks, as ups and downs. You know, that morning I didn't want to get out of bed. Okay, that was a setback, and I stayed in bed for quite some time. But eventually I got up. I didn't stay there, and I just regard it now. Okay, I had a bad day that day, and I'll probably have more bad days, and so will you. So be prepared for setbacks. And in fact, as you prepare for them and regard them in your thinking, we're talking about resilience thinking, regard it as a setback. It's not the end of the world, and that will help you. And be kind to yourself. Have compassion for others, and especially have compassion for yourself. You know, we've all got that inner voice, that inner critic that gives us such a hard time, and most of us would never speak to anyone else like that. We would never criticize or put down someone else like that. So why allow yourself to do it to yourself? So when you hear that voice, you've got another voice there. You can use that other voice. Be kind to yourself. Remind yourself that you can be kind to others, and you must be kind to yourself. So let's talk about some actions now. Love your reaction to these. If you want to type something in, if you're using any of these, okay. Okay. Amanda is saying building resilience can be quite difficult during this time of isolation. Yes, it can, Amanda Jean, and I'm hoping that some people out there will have some more ideas. I've got some to share with you, but I'm looking for yours too very shortly. So, resilience actions. Number one, connect with others. Look, we've managed to connect here. We've got 66 people we're connected with right now, and although we can't see each other, we all have a lot in common, and think about the ways you can connect with this group. You know, if you want to jump on the Facebook, the Mentoring Works Facebook page, or the Mentoring Works Facebook group, and you can talk to one another there. I'll pop those links in the email that I send you later today, and I encourage you to talk about what we've covered here today, what you're doing, what's working for you, what's not working. I'll jump in and interact on those pages as well, but I do encourage you to connect. So nourish your vital relationships, so those who are closest to you. Some of us are working so hard that we might be doing that typical workaholic thing of ignoring those who really mean a lot to us. I suggest that you put those relationships first. Your mothers, your brothers, your sisters, your dads, your cousins, those people who are related to your closest friends. Check in with them. And I encourage you to use some of your mentoring skills with your friends and your family, because they need it as much as anyone. Reach out to your networks, your professional networks, your co-workers, and talk to people who specialise in this sort of field, and those professionals that I mentioned before. Self-nurturing. Now I'm going to talk some more about this as we go through, but these are the actions that you can take. Make a note of something you might need to do here. We can get more specific shortly. Look after your physical. So exercising. I know in Hong Kong, my daughter's in Hong Kong, right? And people in self-isolation in there, there's two types. People who are self-isolating in their homes, they have an app on their phone. They have to walk to the perimeter of their apartment, which is not big, I assure you. Hong Kong apartments are tiny. I've stayed in hotel rooms that are bigger than some Hong Kong apartments, and they have to walk to the perimeter of that. They have to register that, and then they are monitored to make sure they do not go outside. So that's real isolation. Other people are actually taken to isolation centres. My son-in-law is a pilot, and he said he's currently exempt, but if he comes into contact with someone who's got COVID-19, he will be taken to an isolation centre, and he described it as not much more than a cell. So some of us have it better than others, but in these cases we really need to pay attention to our physical well-being, because it's linked to our mental, emotional, and indeed our spiritual well-being. So when I was first in self-isolation, I didn't even go out for a walk, and I started exercising in my small home, walking up and down the corridor, walking around the lounge room, doing laps of the dining room and the kitchen bench, you know. So we can, if we make the effort, do some physical exercise, even if we are confined. Mental. Mental stimulation. What ways are you looking after that? I'm playing Scrabble. There might be more exciting things you can think of to do. Your emotional and your spiritual well-being. Set some goals, but make them realistic and achievable. This is not a time for great big goal setting. Although I will share with you, I chose to go on a diet and stop drinking any alcohol and go on a very strict diet. I'm not coming out of this fatter. I'm coming out of this slimmer and stronger. Now, for me, I knew that was a realistic goal, but for other people, it might not be. It might definitely not be the time to start restricting yourself. But when you set goals, chunk them down, make small goals, and celebrate the achievements. I want you to focus on your strengths. What are you doing well? Some of you have heard me talk about strengths development in the past, and I'll talk about it in the future, so join in the webinars there. But I'm a great believer in the strengths development movement. I recommend the Gallup Strengths Finder, and they talk about developing your strengths and managing your weaknesses. Look at your purpose. Revisit the meaning in your work. Why do you do what you do? What does it do for the world? If you're in a university, you're creating a whole world for your students. You're opening up a whole new world of the future with your students. What is it that you're doing that gives real purpose and meaning to your work? Re-examine that. Keep it right in front of you. Read your organization's mission statement and see how that gels with your own values. Write your own little mission statement. Do something that you love, that you find meaning in, whether it's growing vegetables to feed yourself or whether it's contributing to a cause or a charity, volunteering in some way. If you can, reinforce the purpose for your life. So let's look at some behaviours. I'm running behind time. I'm sorry. I'm going to have to go fast. So resilience behaviours, your awareness. So notice those emotional reactions. So when you're feeling tense, notice it, label it, recognise when other people. Now, I introduced you, I talked about that fight, flight, freeze, reminded you of that because I want you not only to recognise it in yourself, but to recognise it in other people. So understand where they're at. And you might even help them by labelling that. Get strong in your self-regulation. Choose responses rather than those reactions. Okay, when you react, when you might be a bit more snappy than usual, you can apologise to other people. You can apologise to yourself and rein it in. A big key here is going to be listening to others. Suspend your judgment. This is not a time for criticism. This is not a time for saying things like, get a grip on yourself. We're all in this. I can manage, so you must too. Suspend that sort of judgment and rather aim to understand their point of view rather than agree or disagree or judge them for it. It's also a time for assertiveness. Now, assertiveness is not aggressive. Assertiveness means speaking up when it's appropriate and you are able, and yet be flexible. Decide when and how to adjust, when to stand your ground and when to leave, when to back down, when to retreat. Is it appropriate to stand up or is it appropriate to leave? The fight, flight reaction is one that saved our ancestors' lives, and it may be appropriate for us as well at times, but I want you to choose it rather than react. Okay, if you've got comments or questions, I'm just going to have a real quick look what's coming through here. I will look at these afterwards and come back to you. I'm also going to jump into the Facebook page later on and respond to questions in that if we don't have time to cover everything here and now today. Okay, so I want to get into more depth with our mentoring conversations, our meaningful conversations, and I want to share with you one of my own models here. Some of you will have seen this before in my materials or on previous webinars. For others, it might be new. So I always talk about mentoring as being a dynamic relationship and with a couple of dimensions that we need to be aware of. So we tend to think about mentors as people who impart their wisdom, a person who shares their knowledge and experience. But what I want to suggest to you is that these days, mentors also, perhaps even more than ever, ask questions and listen. They elicit, they find out about the mentee, where they are, what's going on for them, how they're feeling, what their thoughts are, what they're doing. So I want you to see this as a dimension, and we move up and down this scale. It's not either or, it's not right or wrong. It's a dimension that we dynamically move along. The other dimension I want you to be aware of is mentors are often seen as people who give support, and more than ever right now, that's going to be really important, especially as people were asking before, how do you start with someone who maybe is a little bit introverted or doesn't want to talk a lot? You need to support them. You need to encourage and validate with them. I'll give you some techniques for that in a moment. But we also need to be in a position to challenge people, to provide a different perspective. And again, it's not either or. You're going to move, you're going to slide along from one end to the other, moving around as if this was sort of a dance floor that you move around. So the place to start is with good questions, good listening, and supportive comments. And that's where you start, because that's what will build trust and rapport. So we're going to get into the questions in a minute. Listening is a big topic, and I've got another webinar on that one. So we want to build trust and rapport, because that's how we get from the opening kind of small talk to a deeper level of conversation. And it's only then, if appropriate, that a mentor will start to share their knowledge and experience. And sometimes it's not even needed. Sometimes people just need to be listened to. And in order to listen, you might need to ask them some questions that really open that up. So what I'm going into now in these meaningful conversations is to expand your stock of questions. You're probably like me, you've got some handy questions, you just pull out of your toolkit and you find yourself asking. I want to expand that, so I'm looking for people to type in your stock questions to share with others as well. Talk a little bit about empathy, not sympathy. And if we're going to impart, I'm calling that kind of educate. In this context, there is so much misinformation out there about coronavirus and its origins. I think that people need to be educated. I know if you're like me, but on social media I'm seeing so much weird, completely ridiculous theories and ideas and conspiracy theories. We need to educate ourselves before we educate others, but we may need to take that stance of being brave and educating other people if it's appropriate. So let's get into this. Let's look at some questions. Before you ask a question, this is such a useful technique. A technique called cushions. Now, as it kind of sounds, you're cushioning your question. This is a question before you ask a question. This depends a lot on your, in this case, your tone of voice, your nonverbal communication. If you're lucky enough to have video at this stage, you might be face-to-face in real life, but more often than not, depending on the restrictions placed on you, you may be at a distance, but you may be there face-to-face, or you might be on video, or you might simply be talking on the phone or by sound. So this relies a lot on your vocal communication, so your tone of voice. You want to come across, when you're going to start asking questions, as curious, polite, and caring. So cushions will help you. And a cushion is a question before a question. Something like, do you mind if I ask? I'm wondering. Would you like to tell me? So there's a softness in your voice, there's a gentleness, there's a curiousness, a polite curiousness, and a respectful curiousness. Something in your tone of voice that tells a person, and your facial expression, if you've got that benefit as well. Your body language should be relaxed and angled towards a person if you are indeed face-to-face. Then you can start to probe. You're kind of unlocking. You want to go deeper here, but you're still doing it respectfully and gently. So they've said something, they've responded to your original question. So you've asked, do you mind if I ask? Then you've asked your question, and they've started to talk, and now you say something like, can you say a little bit more about that? Would you expand on that? Perhaps you'd like to tell me how. Now, please, these are my words. They're my written words. These are not necessarily going to come comfortably out of your mouth, so I'm offering them as examples. I want you to write your own versions of these so that you can use them. And then summarizing. So once I've started talking for a while, you might use summarizing. So what you're saying is, and here you'll restate what you have understood them to say. Or what I'm hearing is, and this is a really good one because you can pick up on things they haven't said but are kind of underneath the surface. So it might be, it sounds like you're feeling a little bit fearful or angry or frustrated or anxious right there. And they can correct you on that. That's the purpose of summarizing. They can correct you. They say, no, I'm fine with this, or yes, I am actually feeling a little bit, and from your point of view. So you're restating what they're saying. So here are some ideas on questions. Now, we all know that we should be using open questions, don't we? So an open question is not one that could be answered with a yes or no answer. But I do find that people can still come back at you with very unhelpful short answers, even when you ask an open question. So you need to go a bit beyond an open question of how, what, when, where. So how is this situation impacting on you? You might follow that up. You might also put a cushion there. I imagine there have been some changes. How's it actually impacting on you? Would you like to tell me about that? Where are you noticing differences now? What are the main challenges for you? So I want you to start writing your own open questions, but questions that are not easy. Like when we say, how are you? Here in Australia now, people tend to say, oh, good, I'm fine, you know. Well, fine isn't all that helpful. They may be fine, they might not. I say I'm fine when I'm sometimes not, I promise you. Others will too. So write your own. Now, we also need to get into empathy, not sympathy. You must listen well and without judgment so that they feel safe to keep talking. And you want to probe and draw them out and take that to a deeper level, but you want empathy, not sympathy. That means showing that you really understand their feelings without getting dragged into those feelings yourself. It is important now because we will be feeling a lot of similar emotions. Yet in this instance, we have to be strong enough not to drown in them. So reflecting and paraphrasing can be useful, just like summarizing. Here, you concisely feedback what they've said. Now, reflecting, you use their actual words. You have to be a bit careful with reflecting because sometimes it can sound a bit like a parrot because you're using a concise version of their actual words. And paraphrasing, you're using your own words. So this is where, you've heard them out and you might say, well, I can understand you might be feeling a bit anxious right now. I'm feeling anxious from time to time. So that's empathizing. They mightn't have used the word anxious. That's what I'm getting at. I've used the word anxious, but they have not. Whereas reflecting, you're careful to use exactly the words that they've used. So you might say, you feel, and then you restate what they said they're feeling. If you're going to paraphrase rather than reflect, you might say, it seems to me you're feeling whatever it was. You have, and look for the positives here as well. What's got you through is whatever it is. So now we're getting onto this final phrase of educate if appropriate. And I want to urge you here not to leap in with advice giving. I do this normally with mentors anyway. It's a real practice to stop yourself from jumping in too early with advice. Sometimes all people need to have is a good listener, someone who can show they care, express some empathy, let them get it off their chest. So don't leap in with advice. Choose your moments. If they ask you for advice, if they've come to you for advice, if you have something practical to offer, then you might start to help them. But it's useful to to actually ask permission, or ask, again, a bit of a cushion, would you like me to give you some suggestions? Should I share with you what I've found useful? Or maybe I could share with you some things that I've seen online that I thought were really good, and you can tell me what you think. Now, I suggest to you in this particular context, because misinformation is so rife, that you be sure to educate yourself before you try and impart or share or educate other people. So it's never been more important to distinguish between facts and opinion. And I want you to be rigorous and disciplined with yourself. What you say and what you share, fact check it. Don't assume something is true. Now, fact checking, it depends on, your particular sources, but I think, you really need to look into what is a reliable fact. Is it coming from a government source? It usually means it's reliable. I know some governments are more truthful than others, but you want to look for what's official. Are experts really credentialed experts? So when and it's fine if you're going to share an opinion, I just want you to share it and own it as an opinion. So when I'm sharing my opinion, I tend to say my personal view is what I found or in my experience. So I preface my comment by making it clear up front, I am sharing with you an opinion, and or where I've got something that's research based, I'll share that and I'll share the references with you. So I was just talking about these trusted sources, tabloid newspapers. I wouldn't trust those. I'd fact check those. What you see on Facebook or Twitter, there's a lot of rubbish out there. There's a lot of lies. There's a lot of misunderstanding. There's a lot of opinions. There's a lot of propaganda out there, and you need to be really careful. So look at that misinformation. There are fake cures. Just this morning on ABC television this morning, they run a fact-checking service, and there's a celebrity who is promoting, in fact, there are a few celebrities, but this particular one is selling a machine for $1,500, I think it is, that's meant to cure the coronavirus, and it's a load of hogwash. But there are people that follow this celebrity who think he's the best thing since sliced bread, who trust what he says, and they're just being taken in. So you've really got to be careful, and you've really got to check. But my effort to you today is still, no matter what, to be kind. One of my friends shared an hour-long documentary with me on social media this week, and I watched maybe the first 10 minutes, and I realised where it had come from and what it was about and what it was doing and how manipulative. It was pure propaganda that has been made by a propaganda machine for a particular outcome, a political outcome. And so I had to find a way to tell my friend and other friends with whom this was shared that, hey, don't scare yourself silly watching this, because it's fake. It's completely fake. And I had to find a kind way to do that because I want my friends to remain my friends. And also we must offer hope. So things will get better, and we need to believe that ourselves, and tell people that too. This isn't magically going to go away tomorrow. In a week or a month or even a year, we have to be realistic, but things will improve over time. There will be a new normal, and it will be okay. So really quickly now, I'm keen to know what you're doing in terms of your well-being and your ability to cope with this. And I've actually got a poll here, another poll. So I'm keen to know what you're doing and to share that. I have got a few ideas that I'm going to share with you, but I know that you'll have your own. So these are probably the most frequent things from reliable sources with science backing that I have found in my exploration of these topics. So are you doing these? Please click on what you're doing. You can have multiple answers here, and any other things that aren't there, type into the question chat box. You can do this anonymously if you want. I'm going to quickly look at the questions. Okay, just while people are still clicking there, I'll read through some of the questions. Don't like to ask you to multitask, but Kerry has a good question. Her example is, what are you feeling now as a result of this conversation? So that's a great question, Kerry. Thanks for sharing that. That's a nice question to kind of wrap up your conversation, and also it may help you. You could vary that with how do you feel now as compared to when we started this conversation. That'll give you a nice measure. Okay, so Katrina says she also likes to ride her bike and talk to my friends. Yeah, things we need to. Maybe we've got the time to do more of that than we did before, or maybe we've still got to make the time. Sarah says coffee dates, drinks dates on Zoom with friends and family. I'm having happy hour with my best friend tonight at 5 o'clock. She'll be drinking champagne in Queensland. I'll be drinking soda water here in Southwest Rocks. But it doesn't matter. We'll have fun. We had lots of fun last time. We'll have fun now. Okay. I thought I had more than one response turned on for that one. Maybe not. I'm so sorry. Okay. Okay, I'm so sorry. It's my error. I'm a little bit stressed right now. My attention to detail goes down when I'm stressed. I'm also noticing we're kind of running out of time. So I'm going to close the poll, share it with you. So maybe it's your number one thing that you're doing right now. Okay, so lots of people are keeping a gratitude journal. It sounds airy-fairy and sort of new age, all of that, but there's science behind this. Keeping a gratitude journal, writing down at least 3 things you're grateful to. If you can't bring yourself to write it down, when you go to bed tonight, here's an action for you. Jot it down. Before you go to sleep, I promise you this will help you. Think of one thing you're grateful for. If you can think of 3 things you're grateful for. There's been times in my life when I've used it laid in bed, and being in a warm, comfortable bed was the one thing I could think of that I was grateful for. But you know what? After I thought of that, I started to think of more things. Hey, I have a roof over my head. I have food in my cupboard. I have money in my bank account, whatever it is. And one thought leads to another. So we have got people practicing those relaxation. A lot of people exercising. That's fantastic. We must keep up our exercise. Note to self, must do more exercise. Eating nutritiously. I know a lot of people are comfort eating, but it might be a time to kind of switch out of that and into something else. And comedy. Comedy is really good too. Okay, let me flick out of that. We're going over time. I hate to go over time. But I do hope that you are looking for ways to increase your well-being and ability to cope. These are time-out things. So here are some things. Make time for yourself. If you've got your entire family at home, chances are you are doing a lot more for your family than you've ever done before. So make sure you carve out a little bit of time for yourself, even if you've got to get up in the, before daylight to make some time for yourself, for your exercise, for your reading a novel or watching some comedy or whatever. Get enough sleep. Sleep actually boosts your immune system. Now, I'm telling you this from research. I'm not giving you the references right now, but they are out there. I can give them to you if you want them. Get enough sleep. It does boost your immune system. And Michael Mosley's actually just brought out, talking of research and resources, Michael Mosley's new book is called, someone help me out with this, Fast Asleep, it's called, new book, and he goes through a lot of the research and also the techniques for getting enough sleep and the fact it boosts your immune system as well as helps you cope and helps you with dealing with stress. And play games with the kids, whether it's the Lego, whether it's board games, whether it's Scrabble, whatever it is, making up your own games. play, and that will help you as well. I want you to, so we've covered it now. We talked about reducing that reaction, that automatic reaction, and building resilience, those meaningful conversations, lots of sample questions there for you. I want you to write your own, and a lot of ideas about wellbeing and ability to cope. I'm sorry it's been rushed. There was more in it than I realised. I do hope you've got some good takeaways from that. I'd love to know what they are. I'm going to stick around as long as people keep typing in, and if you've got more questions, I'll respond to those. If you have to go, thank you so much for joining in today. I hope it was worthwhile. I'm going to send you an email later on today. It will have a link to the recording. It will have the same place you'll be able to download the free ebook. I'll send you a link to the Mentoring Works Facebook page and the Facebook group, and I'll be interacting in both of those if you want to ask more questions or talk to each other, which is a great way we can all connect on Facebook together if you would like to do that. So thank you very much. I'll look for your takeaways and your actions. And I'll look forward to seeing you next week on the webinar. Okay, so I'm looking at the comments now. I'll stick around as long as comments and questions are coming through. If you have more, I'll be here. If not, thank you so much, and I'll stop the recording now and see you next time.